gentlemen, respectful guests here, friends, participants at our conference. So I'm really pleased and privileged that I have opportunity to moderate this main session with such distinguished participants, our guests, and experts. But before we start, I would like to invite the co-director of the Center for Advanced Studies Southeast Europe to share with us the conclusion from the previous day. We had yesterday really tough, but according to our opinion, very fruitful day, so we would like to share with you the information and our conclusions from yesterday, and then we will proceed with the presentations. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, distinguished panel, sorry for, I'm not allowing you to speak immediately, and I simply have to sum up the day that we have had yesterday. As those of you that were with us yesterday know, we had a sunny day, and we had a really intensive, really good debate. Today we have a rainy day, which means this is a precondition for even better discussions. So this is a kind of quest for the panelists and for all of you to be as engaged as possible and don't disappoint us in that sense. So I will just briefly try to sum up what we have been discussing the whole day yesterday. We had 3 panels, the one focusing on the general debates about Europe, the second one focusing on the possibilities or impossibilities of the European Interdisciplinary Studies, and then the last one focusing on financing and fund issues. And let me just briefly sum up what we have discussed. First of all, we started from the assumption that Europe, or the world that we live in, is in a sense in a kind of a crisis. And we then discussed briefly whether the crisis is something that we should actually cry all the time and be like, complaining about the crisis. And we then said, no, the reason why SAS and these European International Interdisciplinary Studies are conducted is actually that we want to take the crisis as window of opportunity. The crisis is here in order to take the chance and to change the course of understanding of Europe in our region and then contributing to the European normalness in a global sense. Then Joseph Weiler from Florence reminded us that there is a clear connection between Pax Americana and the United States of America and the European Union, and he was quite critical. Vesna is probably addressed to you. He was actually sharing the opinion that the demise of the Pax Americana is leaving Europe, when it comes to security and many other issues, with no options in the global world, or with limited options. And he was then trying to argue why a new lease of life is needed in the segment of common security and defense policy, when it comes to common foreign policy of the European Union, and when it comes to sharing the sense or the core values of the European Union in a different way. Then we discussed, Hrvoje Maršić provided us an input about the transformating power of the European Union. We all agreed that this was quite functional in the case of Croatia, but then we were a bit worried about the region of the Western Balkans, having in mind Macedonia, having in mind Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Serbia, and generally the neighborhood of the European Union, which is right now in a change, how the transformative power of the European Union can be applied to all those regions, having in mind a certain fatigue within the European Union when it comes to enlargement and the neighborhood policy. This is something that we should probably, or we would pick up when we go on today. And then we discussed the media, which is an important point, but I'll skip that one. Then we came to the European studies and the issue and the question how to conceptualize European studies, having in mind that we probably nowadays in Europe have at least hundreds, I will not say thousands, but we have at least hundreds of different studies of the European interdisciplinary integration or whatsoever. And then we concluded from the beginning on, if Rijeka wants to be different, than many other European interdisciplinary studies, we have to include a much broader notion of Europe into the account. That means Europe is not EU 28, Europe is not only the enlargement countries, Europe is not only neighborhood. Europe is right now a continent where we do have a kind of a fight between democratic states, authoritarian states, between different concepts of how to approach capitalism, how to embrace capitalism and democracy at the same time, and a kind of an added value of Rijeka might be, or the added value to reflect the broader notion of Europe and to be a place on the margins where different understandings of Europe can be discussed and can be debated. Then, obviously, the regional specificities should be taken into account, and Rijeka that was the conclusion of our debates yesterday, should be a focal point for people from the region, from the neighborhood, and from the European Union in order to discuss not only the different visions and notions of Europe, but also different approaches towards the future of Europe. And Joseph Myler reminded us that we are a bit ideological when we conceptualize our studies, because we assume that European integration is good, that moving towards more of Europe is good. And he actually questioned that, and this is probably one of the issues that we might be able to discuss today. He questioned that, telling us that having this competition between different Europes might lead to a situation where some countries simply don't want to have more integration. This is quite critical, and we should actually take that quite seriously. Then we discussed the question of interdisciplinarity, where once again Joseph Myler reminded us that there is no true interdisciplinarity whatsoever. You have to be good in one discipline in order to be interdisciplinary, and we should probably also elaborate on that a little bit more. And then finally, when it comes to European studies, the conclusion, and this is where we have kind of a common stand, we want to make these studies as critical as possible. And as critical as possible means, once again, to include even anti-European voices into the account, to discuss them, and to remain a bit away from this ideological point of view that might be applied sometimes when we discuss Europe. So, as critical as possible means for us a huge challenge, how to conceptualize something that is as critical as possible, but at the same time how to stick to the core values that we all share. And it was one of the debates between Hurwe, Joseph Myler, and some other guys in the public. I mean, we have some core values of Europe, core values of open society that we want to stick to. We have opponents of this open society, and the question is how to include the different perspectives but still stick to the core values of our Europeanness, which is actually one of the missions of SAS and of Rijeka. And then we came to the financing and fund issues. I will be brief here. One sentence. The debate was between the content and the form. What is the content and how to make a proper shape when it comes to the content in order to get the funds. And this is a kind of a huge dilemma, because when you want to get the funds, you need to be proficient in, I would even say, sometimes fooling around, you know. Saying that you are going to deliver something using some buzzwords whatsoever, and the debate was here between the content, how to have a proper content and how to prepare it, put it in a proper shape in order to be as successful as possible on the European level. So, and the conclusion yesterday, this is where we can pick it up today, is that this is actually the process, that debating Europe or conceptualizing studies about Europe is an ever-changing process where we do need a lot of critical mind, a lot of openness, and where we at the same time have to be aware and have to be cautious how to shape it in order to be as successful as possible. And the success will be measured by the number of students and by the attractiveness of the studies, and they have to be able to attract people from the neighborhood, even from other parts of the world, not only from Europe, and then obviously from the region here, which is still a crucial focal point and interest for all of us. So thank you so much. Sorry, forgive me for being a bit too long, but I simply wanted to refer, and as we are a much bigger audience today, it is good actually that you have a starting point for today's debate. So I wish you all the best, and so.
And our next session. So our speakers today, as you already know, is not only distinguished leaders and experts who are about to introduce an expert with great expertise in European issues, the issues of European research area, European area of higher education, but also they come from different scientific areas. So we have the representative of the social sciences and humanities, technical sciences and biomedicine and medicine. So it will be interesting to see, our issues of European studies, European interdisciplinary studies from these three different scientific perspectives. So I would like to invite our first speaker today. It's our rector, Vero Lucci. But let me say just a few introductory remarks about the very rich biography CV of our rector. So our rector is a rector in his second mandate now. He is rector of the University of Rijeka since 2008. He is delegate of the Rectors' Conference at the European University Association. He was a member of the Croatian negotiation team for the accession to the EU and actually leader of the chapter devoted to the science, research, higher education and culture, and I'm proud that I can say that actually this is the first chapter actually closed during the process of negotiations. Also, our rector was vice rector in two mandates for the postgraduate studies. He was vice dean. He was, what is very important, first president of the Croatian Scientific Foundation, one of the founders of our foundation, and many other things. So also, I would like to say that he is a full professor at our Faculty of Medicine. He's full professor of physiology and immunology. So, director for physiology.
Slide, a lot of slides, and I'm talking with my slides and to make it a bit more dynamic in our presentations and discussion. She said I must do it, so I did it. I usually do the presentation trying to be in line with the time where we are in what we are living now. It's very dynamic and exponential times, so I will present one issue today regarding the course topic. As a cell biology scholar, actually cell physiology scholar, I learned that it's impossible to cover all networks inside the cell, and I learned that it's impossible, there's no need and there's no reason to try to present everything because it's impossible. It's very complex. And I was really surprised yesterday when I was preparing this presentation how many similarities you can find inside the cell and in the society. This presentation is a part of my speech, which I will be doing next week in Dubrovnik, the European Conference of Secondary School Principals. So if presentation is not complete, please apologize me because I still have a week to prepare everything. So when I was thinking what is important to stress in our discussion, I decided to talk about smart specialization and social networks for diffusion of innovation. This is, from my from my point of view, a major issue which tells all us inside the academic community, but also all us who are organizing society, of course, including people from the political process. So I will be very dynamic with our presentation. First, smart specialization is an issue which is in the floor of discussion in Europe, but I believe that it's not very properly understood and it's not very well translated into everyday discussion, everyday language, and of course it's also deals with the issues in the European higher education area, issues in the European research area, but those guys who were constructing and drafting this idea, I believe that had something different behind this idea. It would not just issue of simple policy. So at this stage is the question, what is a smart specialization? Is it a platform for a new massive discussion of the political or European bureaucratic elite, or it is a new platform for rethinking the future of Europe? Of course, when we are talking about Europe, we are talking also about our region, rethinking our future. From my point of view, this second is true, and from my point of view, this is the most important issue for our regions. We should rethink our future in a way of smart specialization or smart specialization way of thinking. The goal of Europe, actually smart specialization is part of the strategy or strategic approach to deal with the crisis at the level of the European Union. So this strategic approach was articulated in Europe 2020. There are several goals. More or less all these goals are based on knowledge, education, and training people. And one of these goals is 75% employment, which is a very high goal. Of course, when we enter deeply what is a smart and what is a specialization, you can see that the smart is evidence-based decision, bottom-up, partnership approach, thinking about the global perspective, but of course using territorial adaptation to innovation for positioning in the global perspective, using knowledge, connecting people, making small visible, setting priorities, selection of people, excellence, so many things which are important for every European region. This also is important for our regions. Of course, I'm not going to talk about smart specialization. I'm going to talk about what is the problem with smart specialization. But smart specialization means, does it work? Smart specialization means that it's important to use all possible resources in science, knowledge, and education and research sectors, enterprise sectors, and public sectors or government sectors. All these resources should be joined, and the key for the success of the smart specialization is joint effort of all these sources, of course, at the regional level. So at the current stage in Europe, there is a lot of discussion about regional smart specialization strategies, and very rare examples are that all these three circles are connected. So from the starting point, there is a high degree of certainty that smart specialization strategy will fail. This is a European smart specialization landscape. Blue is very good, gray or gray does not exist, light blue is very poor. So you can see where is our region. We even do not seriously discuss about the smart specialization. And smart specialization strategy is, from my point of view, a key strategic approach also for development of our regions, for integrations of our regions into Europe. Of course, there's no need to explain why there is a lot of talent and potential here in our region. Of course, what is a problem? The problem is short-term, long-term thinking, short-term, long-term investment thinking, and my presentation will be short-term, long-term presentation of this problem. a long-term nature of research, innovation, implementation, innovation, every modeling society, including business approaches and entrepreneurship of people, is in a huge collision with the short-term cycles and goals of the politics and people who are in governments, local or national or even European governments. I would like to explain what smart specialization what does smart specialization mean? This is important to understand. It's important to change the model of thinking, rethinking the model of social innovation, how to connect these three pillars. This is American model. So a lot of education, high education, but high degree of political orthodoxy will fail, will create stagnation. Low education with low degree political orthodoxy will also create stagnation. So the political process and education process should be very tightly connected. When we are thinking short term, we also should think about what does really mean innovation. And this is just a slide to mention to all that invention is something new, and innovation means a new way of doing things. So when I'm talking about innovation, I'm not talking about products, I'm not talking about new type of transistors, I'm talking about innovation in the society, organization, relation between people. So when we are thinking about innovation and the rule of innovation, we should think short-term but also long-term, and short-term, long-term thinking should be connected. So the question of smart specialization, how to efficiently use factor of productivity. This is a picture of the 20th century. So the factors of productivity were based on land, capital and labor. And now we are at the stage to think how to use these factors of the productivity in a short-term way. So if we want to think about the long-term way and how to use the factor of productivity in the 21st century, this is intellectual capital, social capital, so groups of talented and entrepreneurial people, and creative capital which we translate into interdisciplinarity. So if you connect engineer, artists and housekeeping people, you will get much better output than if you just connect three engineers. That's a theory of creative capital. So when we are thinking about the smart specialization of our regions, we should think on at the same time short term how to survive, and long term how to develop the potential to use all these factors of productivity in the 21st century. So, of course, we should also think what people will work, what people will do for a living. What are the 20th century jobs and 21st century jobs? Of course, these are extremes, but unless many people were working on the jobs on a grade which do not exist any longer, and new jobs are emerging. So these should be studied, they should be rethinked, and these are just examples of studies in the United States, in America, disappearing jobs and emerging jobs. So the landscape, the picture is rapidly changing, is completely different. And of course, this part of the story is very long. I'm not going to continue with the jobs, which means competences, study programs, organization of society, rethinking what we are training our people. Are we training for local competition or local work, or global training for local students? Local management is completely different than training for global. Are we training people for management of society or management of nature? So this is a way that we should use when we are rethinking our study programs and our organization of education program. I'm stopped with the job. Here just just a picture of new emerging jobs in the technological sector. These jobs did not exist 10 years ago, and these jobs have a great future, and they are already developing in the world. Of course, many of these kind of pictures can be created when we are thinking about the smart specialization in our future. Of course, we should also think about competences for the 21st century. This is a part of the scholarly discussion about the study programs, and we'll talk also with this, but just to remind you that the competences, skills, and are completely different for the 21st century productivity and for the 21st century jobs. Of course, I'm talking about mode of operation in society. This is simplified mode of operation in 20th century or in our society. Groups, firms, research teams, not very well connected, and everybody is producing by themselves with very little communication. The outcome is poor. In 21st century, all these should be connected. So when we turn back to the people from the government, people from the research, higher education, and people from the business sector, all these islets should be very tightly connected. So when we start thinking about connections, and connecting all these dots and circles, we come to the concept of networks. The concept of the networks is something which is emerging. We do not properly understand this concept, but for instance, we are able to understand what is the meaning and the power of social networks which are in everyday use, for instance, Facebook and this kind of networks. What we learn from this network should be used also for the construction of the social network for the smart specialization and development of society. So, the point of 21st century policy for the smart specialization or its development of social network, the diffusion of knowledge, innovations, smart specialization, and many other things. If we want to construct these social networks, we should be able to understand this. So there are many scientific papers about the networks. Networks has a hierarchy. This is a just example of the paper from the Nature, which described the hierarchy of the network. But also, there are also networks in the business. This is the innovation network of Apple. The innovation network, something like 7 or 8 years ago. Innovation network 3 years ago, which is clearly is growing, is expanding. Our networks are currently weak and very undeveloped or not well developed. And what is the point of smart space? For example, network of university. This is the picture of our university. A lot of dots, maybe some groups, but very poorly connected, and of course with the joint outcomes, which is relatively poor. This should be, for example, picture of university or network of university, or even much tighter, much more connection between these dots. And the education training also is not very well connected. This is just network, for example, university and connection of university with secondary schools or primary schools. There are almost no connections. Of course, connection of the university with public sector institutions, agencies, small and medium-sized enterprises, etc. So very poor connection, and the point of the smart specialization and construction of social network is to connect everything, to connect all these people. Networks should be much bigger and more complex. So, if we are able to understand this, then we should invest in developing of this network. Short-term way of thinking is also considers understand principles of the diffusion of innovation in the society. But when we try to understand the concept of diffusion in the society, we should be able to understand that there is no segregation between the real world and digital world. And of course, I'm talking just from everyday experience, what I'm fighting with within our network of the University and Croatian Society. Short-term way of thinking also should consider that the process of learning is much faster, and diffusion is much faster. And it is also important to understand what is required for the diffusion of innovation inside the network. So this is the distribution of people in population, and 2.5% are innovators, and 13.5% are early adopters. Altogether 16%. This 16% is critical for the diffusion innovation, but it's also critical for the construction of the network. This is Rogers' classification, this original cartoon. So there are only 16% of people who want innovation, who want new things, who want development. And among this, only 2.5% are real innovators. And these people should work and combat the resistance which exists inside the network, inside the society. Early adopters are those who really early adopt every idea. Most of people are late adopters, and of course there are also some laggards which creates resistance. So when we are thinking about the network, we should think how to shift this curve to the left to create more people with, within the group of 16%, and this can be called positive selection. If we make shift to the right, we make a negative selection, and in selection it's impossible to create and develop a network. These are just some basic principles of the network, and of course we should also consider the theory of broken windows, which means that broken windows, the idea of broken windows diffuse rapidly, and every resistance which is normally created inside the network diffuse rapidly. So the constructor of the social network should deal with the broken window phenomenon. And of course someone has to do it. If you want to construct a network, you need the leaders who are able to construct a network. And this is just part of the story of leaders, and I'm not going to talk about the leaders. This is my lecture for Dubrovnik, but this is just for association. The position of leaders, the role of a leader today is completely different. And the leaders are those who are working very hard and who are constructing the network. Of course, short-term thinking means that we should develop a policy for construction of these networks, policies. These policies should be translated in the proper use of all possible resources in business, in public sector, and research and higher education sector, which are three pillars of smart specialization. And these resources jointly can create a social network for diffusion of innovation. So development of the social network for the diffusion innovation, including also smart specialization, is, from my point of view, is infrastructure for the successful development in the 21st century. So if something is infrastructure, this infrastructure should be invested very highly. At the moment, in our region, we are not able to make this kind of decision. Long-term thinking, of course, means primarily development of people who are able to construct this network and to organize this network. The only way to construct a social network for diffusion, for the smart specialization, is training. Training and education of people through lifelong learning, primary, secondary education, and of course tertiary education. And to make training, you need a lot of teachers, educators, and trainers. People train with the leadership skills, and you need the leaders to create the network. These principles are just copied from the social networks we experience today through our communication. But this is much more serious and requires highly sophisticated outline of competences and highly sophisticated way of thinking. This is the project which needs a scientific approach. If we go back to our landscape, I have just data for Croatia, but it's not much different for other parts of our region. Where are highly educated, those who should be not in this network? You can see the picture of Croatia. Only these red spots are areas when there are a sufficient number of highly educated people. But if you want to develop highly sophisticated network, which means smart specialization based on knowledge and research, you need people with research competences. And in Croatia, there are only 4 areas when there is a sufficient concentration of these people. In these areas, of course, there are universities, and I believe in the whole Southeast Europe, the picture is more or less the same. Simply, there's not enough people. Of course, there's not enough institutions, and this is my cartoon about the universities and the capacities of university to transfer technology. XXL are very capable university, XS are small capacity university. And my estimation that most of universities in our regions are XS and S. Some may be M. So there is no organization, institution which is a huge node for the construction of the social network. If we want to construct a social network with smart specialization, we need strong institutions. Of course, this is again another story, and I will stop here with this, but I believe you understood this. Just several messages which I am sending to everyone in the last time. The message from Charles Darwin: this is the evolution, and the strongest species to survive is not the most intelligent, but most responsive to changes. The whole story about gazelle, she knows that it must outrun the lion or it will be killed, and lion knows that it must run faster than the slowest gazelle or it will starve. So this is the nature, this is the evolution principle, and if you go back to the cell and connection and networks inside the cell, there's no big difference. There is also a fight for survival and adaptation. So we should also survive, and we should also fight, because this is the normal evolution. And my message is we do not run sufficiently fast, because we think that everybody should change the world, but no one thinking of changing himself or herself. This is the nature of our people, and the message of this conference, and of course what we are expecting from the Center of our Advanced Studies, is to be a node for the development of social network, especially a node, a place for research of the society, because without societal changes, it is impossible to provide new employment, new jobs, and technology innovations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our rector. It is really very precious contribution to our discussion about interdisciplinarity and disciplinarity, or the deep disciplinarity on the one side and the wide interdisciplinarity on the other. We have now a new concept, the concept of smart specialization, as a concept that can embrace actually disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity on a special way. Also, it seems to me very interesting, the idea that actually interdisciplinarity is a kind of the framework from the creation of the distribution or the network for the more successful distribution or the diffusion of knowledge. So, thank you very much. I would like now to invite our second speaker in this session is the Minister Vedran Mornar. So let me say just a few words about also this very rich curriculum vitae. Professor Vedran Mornar is the Minister of Science, Higher Education and Sport in the government of Republic of Croatia. And 2 mandates, he was the Dean of the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computing, very remarkable and distinguished institution at the University of Zagreb. He was the President of the National Council for Higher Education and a member of the numerous bodies, university bodies, and also bodies in the area of research and higher education. For instance, he participated very fruitfully in the developing of our Croatian qualification network. He was actually one of the creators and founders of our system of state exam, state exit exam in high school, not only substantially but also in its informational aspects. Professor Morner is a full professor of computing at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computing, Fulbright Fellows, and actually author of many distinguished articles and books. So, Professor Morner, our minister, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for this very nice introduction. I must say that it's very difficult to speak after Per. I have a presentation too, but it will not be as near as vibrant, as amazing in this of the director. You never give the guest the good wine first and then move for the worst. I hope that our dessert wine will leave the better taste at the end, but let me start with my presentation, which is, I would say, at least not as vibrant as Professor Lucin's. So, I will talk about European higher area of higher education and how Croatia fits in it. Also give a few remarks on how we fit and how we cope with European research area. Let me start with the constatation that education policy belongs to the sensitive policy areas because it's diversity across countries. Its complexity and interconnectedness with other social policies and its characteristic of being able to generate social, cultural and economic consequences. This is why EU open method of coordination proved to be an excellent EU governance tool. On one hand, it is as a compromise between the desire for common action, while on the other hand it supports autonomy in sensitive policy areas. As a new EU member state, Croatia participates actively in the open method of coordination and benefits from peer learning, which contributes to evidence-based policy making. If we take a historical perspective, the process of cooperation among EU member states has generated a large set of reforms at the national level. Although these reforms were primarily aimed to easier comparability of education systems across Europe, they have also introduced new approaches in education. Education and training policies are still very diverse across the EU, but it may be argued that the convergence has started to evolve. This is demonstrated by the shift to the evidence-based policy making and the learning outcomes approach. Reforms that are needed to take place in order to create the European higher education area were connected directly to the nationally sensitive issues, such as the structure of higher education systems and quality assurance. We believe that focus should be on enhanced use of Bologna tools. For example, the potential of European qualification framework has not been fully explored in its role as a tool for validation and recognition of skills and qualifications. We believe that if the EQF would be taken forward within the area of validation and recognition of skills and qualifications, it might lead to creation of mutual trust in qualification systems and quality assurance arrangements between the EU member states, and thus the EU could aspire for automatic recognition of all qualifications for all purposes within the EU area of qualifications, and both learning and working mobility might become a reality. Developing higher education in the wider European area means not only taking into account the diversity of the national systems and institutional practices, but recognizing them as an advantage. In this sense, as the conclusion emerges from the key documents of the Bologna process, solution for individual smaller issues can be resolved differently at the national level. On the other hand, we agreed that there are some general goals and priorities that we should aspire to deal together. In short, the general goals are the same, but the path to their achievement is not strictly defined, and we have freedom to decide how are we going to get there. Let me see if this mind reader works. European research area is a unified research area to open to the world. based on the internal market in which researchers, scientific knowledge and technology circulate freely. Well-functioning, unified and coherent ERA is an integral part of the Innovation Union, with the goal to strengthen the knowledge base in Europe, attract talent and investment. Although much has already been achieved, further efforts of the member states and research stakeholders are needed to make the ERA fully operational. Completion of ERA remains a gradual process and is up to the member states and research stakeholders, in close collaboration with the Commission, to strategically coordinate and align, where possible, the national strategies and research programs and activities, aiming to better joint tackling grand societal challenges and implementing the necessary ERA reforms in order to accelerate structural reforms of national systems, intensify our efforts to raise the quality and impact of public spending on research and innovation in accordance with national and regional strategies, further synchronize national and European roadmaps on the research infrastructures, and to further improve financial commitments for the development of research infrastructures. And finally, to foster mutual policy learnings initiatives, including peer reviews, as well as any other initiatives allowing for a better understanding of the impact of the policy. Relevant conclusions adopted by the Council of Ministers invite the Member States of the EU to enhance quality of education to mobility and cross-border cooperation. Measures proposed by these conclusions refer to removing obstacles to mobility, notably enhanced recognitions of student mobility using Bologna tools, which are of course European Credit Transfer System, Diploma Supplement and European Qualifications Framework. Internationalization should be in the focus of every national education policy. It is important to develop all aspects of internationalization: mobility of students and teachers, internalization of study programs, digital learning, as well as strategic cooperation and partnership of higher education institutions aimed at building institutional capacity. I'm happy to say that last Friday, the Croatian Parliament adopted the strategy for education, science and technology of the Republic of Croatia from 2014 to 2020. One of the goals of this strategy is internationalization of higher education and its integration into the European and higher education area. This goal refers to increasing outgoing and incoming mobility of students and teachers, encouraging modules offered in foreign languages, increasing the number of joint degree programs with eminent higher education institutions, and increasing foreign academic staff at higher education institutions. There are certain indicators that we set in the strategy. For example, we said that our goal is to achieve 10% of the student mobility by 2020. For comparison, currently it is around 1% of student mobility, outgoing student mobility. We are also trying to enhance the incoming student mobility to 5%. Currently, we are 100 times lower. Currently, we have 0.05% incoming student mobility. These data show that in comparison to other EU members, Croatia has a very modest student mobility. We will, of course, try to enhance that through the measures taken with the strategy and by removing the obstacles that we face in the higher education area, which are first financial obstacles, because this Erasmus scholarship does not cover all the costs which we face when studying abroad. And of course there are some higher education institutions which very reluctantly recognize these credits achieved in other countries. So the students have to do the job again when they return home. The program Erasmus Plus, Program for Education, Training and Sport, is a very important financial instrument for internationalization of higher education. It will not be sufficient for reaching the mobility sector strategy itself. Another financial instrument, so-called program agreements which are concluded between my ministry and the higher education institutions will enhance this process, because the aim of this program is to achieve a strategic, stable, long-term, evidence-based, centrally managed by rectors, performance-based funding of higher education institutions. The 3-year pilot program agreements were concluded in 2012, and since the budget refers only to the student tuition fees, the goals set to measure the outcomes of the program are related to teaching and studies. The Ministry and higher education institutions agreed on set of national strategic objectives, and higher education institutions could also choose the objective of the internalization of the higher education. These pilot funding agreements cover approximately 10% of the entire state funding by the state budget. They are result-oriented and present as the first step in introduction of full funding agreements, which we are trying to achieve by the next academic year. Further internationalization of higher education will contribute significantly to the vision of the Ministry of Science, Education and Sport to build a globally competitive, high-quality, accessible and sustainable system of education and training, harmonized with the labor market needs and society as a whole. Major advantages of mobilities and internationalization of studies are upgrading the quality of higher education system, notably to training and teaching, and teaching and non-teaching staff, and development of new curricula based on learning outcomes. Mobility of researchers is directly bringing new ideas, knowledge and networks for the researchers and creating high-quality values. Removing barriers to the mobility of researcher is one of the Croatian national priorities. One of the ERA priorities focused on improving researcher skills for intersectoral mobility, for example by encouraging innovative doctoral training approaches. My ministry has recognized the importance of creating strong generator of researchers to support the development of an effective labor market for researchers in Croatia by connecting industry and scientific community. Additionally to that, we have new FELPRO, the International Fellowship Mobility Program for experienced researchers in Croatia. This is a fellowship project of the government of the Republic of Croatia and the Ministry of Science, Education and Sport. The project is co-financed through Marie Curie, FP7, People 2011 and co-fund program, and the total value is around 7 million euros. 60% of this amount is financed from national sources. Project duration is from 2013 and last until 2017, and in total 83 scholarships will be granted through this scheme. New FELPRO project is additional strategic effort by the government of Croatia to invert the negative trend towards brain drain phenomenon. The long-term objective of the Ministry of Science New FELPRO project is to raise the presence of research-qualified individuals by providing them with new opportunities to gain relevant international experience and thus contribute to the further development of international scientific networks. The program is also intended to increase international income and mobility of talented researchers by providing them with an opportunity to work in a country that has a very good potential to offer new positions for researchers in both academic and private research and development institutions. Here I have some facts about the program. Young researchers are predominant in total number of applicants. These young researchers are researchers between 4 and 10 years of experience, and young researchers are mostly choosing longer scheme of scholarship, and usually they take 2 or 3 years period. The third year is mandatory coming back year, so they accommodate back to their institution when they went from. We can say that we send students to Slovenia. I will not read all these countries which are on the slide. Then we have incoming mobility from a few countries. We will try, of course, to enlarge this number in the future. Southeastern Europe and its role in the European higher education area, we must at first bridge the institutional gap. Other EU's member states have given to Croatia a prominent role in the EU enlargement process to countries of Southern East European region. Therefore, the Ministry of Science, Education and Sports and so on provides active support to Ministries of Education in our region. An example of this support were 3 consecutive events which were organized in September in Zagreb related to recognition of higher education qualifications and the role of European and national qualification frameworks in recognition. Our events are organized as a peer learning combined with peer review, since it has been widely recognized as an efficient tool to both building up one competence and creating more comprehension of other systems. The topic of mutual recognitions of qualifications among countries of the region should be high in the national education policy agenda, since fair and fast recognition of qualification is a prerequisite for regional mobility, for the purpose of employment, as well as for the purpose of continuation of education. The overall strategic framework for supporting the Southeast Europe region, Southeast Europe Strategy 2020, one of macro-regional strategies of the EU, adopted by the Ministry of Economy in 2013. It includes a chapter on education and competences. The coordinator of this chapter is the Education Reform Initiative of Southeastern Europe. Its governing board is composed of representatives of all ministries of education in the region. I am convinced that this body would contribute to facilitating cooperation among countries and the region by joint activities related and will agree some regional set of goals and objectives. I believe there is a need for more enhanced cooperation at the education policy level between the countries in the region, and there are some countries in the region which should be more involved and take a stronger role in shaping this coordination. Furthermore, some countries in the region should be more active in the activities of the Bologna follow-up group and its working groups. For example, Slovenia and Croatia were chairing a regional working group on recognition of qualification in Southeastern Europe, and as I mentioned earlier, we have directed our efforts to supporting the region, to removing obstacles to recognitions of qualifications and increasing regional mobility. Implementation of national qualification frameworks and proper use of all Bologna tools will lead to the development of a mutual trust, which is a precondition for achieving the Bologna aims of comparability in the standards and quality of qualifications in Europe. The European qualifications framework is at our disposal as an instrument for making recognition easier and more transparent, and all governments should secure legislative framework in which the national qualification framework will be a key instrument for recognition of foreign qualification. In reference to regional cooperation in research, Croatia participates in the Western Balkans Regional Research and Development Strategy for Innovation for the period 2014 to 2020, with Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Kosovo and Albania. The proposed strategy is envisioned to become integrated as the research pillar of the Southeast Europe Strategy 2020. It should serve as a platform for continued policy exchange, public policy dialogue, capacity building and policy advocacy. The exchange of good practice based on the successful implementations of policies will be derived from the Croatian example and will aim at raising the levels of openness of the institutions while promoting the international visibility agenda. Its role will be monitoring, evaluating and developing the character as the strategy, and the subsequent action plan envision the implementation Research Excellence Fund, Networks of Excellence Technology Transfer Program, and Early Stage Startup. Desired outcomes are aligned with the Europe 2020 strategy goals to the improvement of the research base and conditions for research excellence, promotion of research industry collaboration and technology transfer, enabling the business investments and startups, as well as general strengthening of governance in the area of our policies, alongside Europe 2020 strategy, which is the key strategy implemented in all ministries, programs and initiatives. A number of projects aim to accomplish synergies with the Southeast Europe 2020 strategy and EU strategy for the Adriatic and Ionian region and EU Danube strategy. For any information, contact my minister. Thank
you. We are really thankful to the minister. Actually, he stresses the main pillars of our jobs at the universities. You know, the European area of higher education and the Bologna process on the one side, and on the other side, European research area, the concept of innovation, transfer of technology, and the third pillar, actually mobility and internationalization of study programs and the researches. We all here at the European University Studies actually are great believers in the mobility and the internationalization of education and the research is not only the region, Southeast Europe and the Western Balkan, but European, non-Europeans. So thank you very much, Minister, to your contribution. So I'm now very pleased, extremely pleased that I have opportunity to say just a few introductory remarks from the really, really rich curriculum vitae of our dear guest and partner in this project of European Studies, Deputy Minister Vesna Pusic. So, Professor Vesna Pusic is Deputy Prime Minister, but since December of 2011 she has been serving as a Croatian Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs. After becoming involved in politics in the early 1990s, Professor Pusic served 3 consecutive terms as a member of Croatian Parliament. I would like to say, and it would be actually impossible to say of which body Professor Pusic is actually member and the president, but I would like to say that the Professor Pusic is a full professor at the Sociology Department, Faculty of Philosophy, University of Zagreb, but actually she was a guest and a visiting professor at the University of Chicago, Cornell University, American University in Washington, D.C., as well as the Wilson Center. So we are very pleased. I'm really privileged that I have, to give the floor to the Minister Vesna Pusic.
Thank you very much, Rector, Minister, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's extremely exciting actually to be here because this is an extremely exciting project. The University of Rijeka has distinguished itself by actually always having something new every time you come here. And this is probably the reason why it's so innovative and why it's so attractive to people who come with new ideas, because it doesn't stand still. When I was listening to Vedran Džihić summing up your debates from yesterday, I was actually a little jealous that I wasn't here. But actually, while you were talking about these things, I was sitting in Luxembourg at the Foreign Affairs Council with my 27 colleagues from the other 27 EU member states, discussing European response to Ebola, the situation in Libya, the situation in Ukraine, and the future of the Middle East peace process. Each and every one of these issues extremely important, in great need of a coherent, focused approach and policy, in great need of a common European approach and policy, of a very, if possible, proactive European approach, and to some extent, in a situation in which everybody was at a loss of how to react to any of these issues. The reason was that in some ways even those that are old are in some ways new, like the Middle East peace process. It's old, but it's also new in terms of the conditions that have been created in the meantime, the settlements, the change or some changes in the US and European policy towards the peace process. The two-state solution that became a standard without implementation. Ebola definitely new. Deteriorating relations with Russia, completely new. Nobody remembers the last time the relations with Russia were deteriorating, and certainly nobody remembers the time when, because there wasn't such a time, where you had this level of interdependency between Russia and the West, and at the same time deteriorating political relations. Syria and Iraq and Libya, southern Mediterranean, I don't even have to mention. Completely new circumstances, completely new methods, completely new adversaries, completely new issues that you have to deal with. It was, I think, the British historian Norman Davies, who actually, sometime in the mid-20th century, discovered or articulated the fact that basically until his days, until him, European history was never seen as history of all of Europe. European history was always seen as the history of Western Europe. And it was actually the sort of whim of some dons at Oxford, because I came from Cambridge, where Norman Davies was a student that provided him with a scholarship to go to Poland. And his history of Europe, which I'm sure most of you have read, but those who haven't should, is the first history of Europe that includes Eastern Europe. To be sure, it does include some of Eastern Europe, but it does not include us. In other words, it does not include this little corner of Southeastern Europe where we belong to, because even advocates of a sort of integral history of Europe somehow cannot bring themselves to even take into consideration this sort of lower right-hand corner. And this is why this Center for Advanced Studies of Southeast Europe is so important. So important to put on the map a few things. First, us, to be here. Secondly, the fact that you cannot, I think you couldn't even before, but today and in the years to come, you certainly will not be able to conduct policies, resolve conflicts, design development strategies without knowledge. And as we speak, we are witnessing a few situations in international relations that I would like to mention that are, in my opinion, directly a result of political action without sufficient understanding and sufficient knowledge of what you are actually doing. One you all remember is the preparation or the lack of preparation for the American presence in Iraq. As you all know, there's they're fantastic experts on Iraq, Middle East, in different and fantastic institutions of higher education and research in America. However, when the decision was made, the assumption was that there were no preparations really needed in terms of understanding the society, understanding the religious aspects, and understanding the institutional infrastructure, understanding preferences, ties, alliances that lasted for many years, in some cases centuries. The assumption was that when people see democracy, they will be so overjoyed that they will just reach out and grab it and run with it. And when it didn't happen, everybody, but certainly the people who were involved in this, were shocked, disappointed, and didn't quite know what to do. I think in many ways the price was paid in a lot of lives, and the price was paid also in a permanent, destable area, and now very dangerous area that we have in that country. The other aspect or example was dissolving the Iraqi army. It is true, it was an army that was put together by Saddam Hussein. But at the top, it probably had his loyal followers, soldiers, but the rank and file were just soldiers in a structure. When that was dissolved, never again was a real Iraqi army put together. And at the same time, these people with military training, and very often with arms, were let loose into the society. This, in my opinion, is strictly a result of not sufficiently understanding some of the basic principles, and you will excuse me, gentlemen, of social science. Maybe also networking, but really of social science. I know that, especially in this company, there is 90% of the people who think that social science is not science. And it's serious stuff that these guys do. But actually, this was a lack of understanding and insight into some things that are very basic in social science, and that you actually do learn and can learn. In such soft areas as anthropology, political science, sociology, even geography. This is not a social science thing, but also considered soft. The third example, and to some extent I was a witness to that, were discussions about Syria, what to do there. And at that time, the prevailing approach was, let's talk to the opposition that's outside of the country. Coming from where I come from, my basic instinct was, let's talk to the opposition that's in the country. Because those are the people that might know a little bit more about the country and a little bit more about the mechanisms functioning within the country, and they are the opposition. This comes from, let's say, experience, but also social science. Also a number of different studies of conflicts like that, where you actually look for the people who can take over once the old regime, so to speak, passes on. Some people who can actually provide some basic functioning of the institutions, can understand some basic mechanisms of functioning of that society. That might be useful. In this case, I think it has been proven that would have been necessary for swifter and more efficient resolution of that particular situation. And finally, the fourth example, or the fourth rule that's universally accepted, and there are obvious and very good reasons for that: talking to the terrorists. This is, by the way, a book that has recently been published by Jonathan Powell, the former Chief of Staff of former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and now actually Special Envoy of the current Prime Minister of Great Britain for Libya. Talking to the terrorists, the debate of following the rule, we never talk to the terrorists, and the rule, we should try to talk and bring to the table anybody who is in a conflict, because it's always better to try to resolve conflicts of that kind through negotiations, through talking, that whenever that is possible, than through military means. Those are a few examples I wanted to use to emphasize the simple point, and in some ways, I think, similar points to what Pero Luchin was making. And that is that in politics, the same as anywhere else, in any other human endeavor, it is important to have the so-called appropriate knowledge at the right time. In other words, it's important to know or have the knowledge that fits the problem. That fits the problem that you have to face or that you have to resolve. And contrary to some skeptics, it is particularly true in social sciences, particularly true when you're making decisions that actually have consequences for very big groups of people, sometimes globally. And it is also surprising how often people rely on knowledge and expertise when they make relatively minor decisions, but completely ignore knowledge and expertise when they're making really big, far-reaching decisions. This, I think, is a very strong argument for this Center for Advanced Studies of Southeastern Europe, because Southeastern Europe needs to make some short-term and some long-term decisions. Southeast Europe will be faced deliberately, willingly, or unwillingly with some very important decisions in the next 10 years about its own future, about its influence on volatile, sensitive, and important neighborhoods, such as the southern Mediterranean on one side, and the so-called Eastern neighborhood countries on the other. Maybe only the Middle East has a more exciting neighborhood than us. So Southeast Europe will be asked to play a role that's way bigger than itself, simply because of its position, simply of where we are. And I think it's extremely important that we actually know something about ourselves, about the decision-making process, about the history of the region, about the political processes in the region, about the instruments that lay at our disposal before we start making those decisions. And I think you would have expected this from me. I happen to think that European Union is, for us, an extremely useful instrument. We have started, with the exception of Slovenia, we have started entering the European Union after the euphoria on either side. Nobody was very excited that we entered within the European Union among the old member states, unlike the 2004 enlargement. And nobody was particularly excited on the inside, meaning citizens of this country, meaning that from now on all our problems will be solved. Nobody really thought that. People were very level-headed, very realistic in what to expect, and supported the whole idea in the referendum by 66.4%. 2/3 beginning of 2012, 2/3 today. Because we see that, and I strongly believe everybody else in Southeastern Europe sees that as a stabilizing framework, as something that helps you as a new state build institutions. Is it ideal? It's not. Of course it's not. Is it what the European values say it is? Of course it's not. Nothing is. Nothing corresponds completely to the original ideal. Because the original ideal is the positive utopia. The original ideal is a road sign of where you want to go. It's not something that you implement and then you're finished and you go home and everybody lives happily ever after. No, it's something that motivates you to continue going. I mean, you cannot say that in a country where, in an organization, in an organization where in its parliament there are extremist political parties, there are chauvinist political parties, there are individuals who are real zealots, that they're promoting European values. No, but European values still exist. It doesn't mean that they're being implemented every day and every European Union institution lives by them. No, but they're there. And we are there to maybe, when we come to long term, pick them up and run with them and see what we can do with them, whether we can promote them a little further. But in order to have the luxury to do that, in order to have the luxury, for instance, to reintroduce the concept of freedom into politics, which, if you have noticed, has almost completely disappeared. In order to have the luxury to do that, we also have to figure out a way to stabilize our countries, to stabilize our region, to politically mature and grow to the point where we actually feel the responsibility not only for our country, but also for our region, and maybe a little broader. And in order to do that, we need to know more. And this is why I'm so enthusiastic about the Center for Advanced Studies of Southeastern Europe, because it will give us a lot of opportunities to learn, to meet and discuss, and to, even when we disagree about Europe, use the European value of dialogue and mutual respect in agreement and disagreement as the basis for our future discussions. So thank you, people. It's been a great honor.